everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Nine Inch Nails Retrospective. We are doing episode 2 here today, even though this is technically the third major project from the band that we are covering, because in our first episode, Luke and I talked about Broken and Pretty Hate Machine. We detailed a little bit of the history of the recording of the band and the development of the musical project of Trent Reznor, as well as talking about what this series is and what we're going to be doing. And of course, today we are joined by Ryley.
Yes,
Welcome.
I'm delighted to be here. This was one of those projects that in the Jams and Tea podcast era, we were like, it was always something we wanted to do. So
Hmm.
I'm pleased that it's finally happening, and I'm pleased that I can be a part of it. And especially with regards to this album, which is, I'll just give a little bit of context. I think it makes sense to sort of start by
Yeah,
talking about personal relationships with the
sure,
albums
yeah.
before we get into this meat of what it is. This is actually one of the first albums, not the first, but it was one of the first albums that I truly loved as a kid, which is such a bizarre thing to say, right? But my dad played this to me at a really young age. I think another weird thing as well is I can't remember which happened first, whether it was listening to this album or whether it was hearing the remix version of Closer that appears over the opening titles of David Fincher's Seven.
Yeah.
But those were both experiences I had at an age where like most parents would not expose their children to those things. But either way, like my dad was a huge fan of Nine Inch Nails, and so they were just on a lot as a kid. And Downward Spiral was his favorite album of theirs, along with Teeth as well. But Downward Spiral was the one I gravitated to like instantly, or not instantly, but it was the one I gravitated to most quickly. It was the most exciting music I think I had ever heard in my life at that time. It was so thrilling and surprising. I grew up in a household where we listened to a lot of electronic music, more so than rock music, I would say. My dad was into a lot of like alternative 90s sort of music that was melding sort of electronica and hip hop and things that were really sort of off the beaten path prior to the 90s, but then became a huge part of culture. And what was really, really interesting about this record was the way that it infused sort of more standard rock instrumentation with layers and layers and layers of electronic effects, of strange and bizarre instrumentation choices, of incredible studio production wizardry, like just working on all kinds of levels of ambitious, how can we fuck with these sounds and do these things in really, really interesting ways. So it was an album that had a profound effect on me even before I could comprehend the subject matter of the record. Like, I heard Close when I was a kid. I knew it was about sex, but like I wasn't thinking about it, I was just sort of getting into this incredible sounding song that had all of these different layers happening. And it did something really, really cool where like the first 3 minutes of the song was sort of a conventional song, but then it went on for like the same amount of time and there was no lyrics and it was just doing really, really cool stuff with the beat. It was like, and I thought I thought that was the coolest shit in the world. Listened to it really, really young, sort of fell in love with it, and it really influenced like what I started looking for in music. Not so much the aggression, but just sort of like layers and layers of like really cool things interacting with each other in a really interesting way, which is sort of, a big part of what electronic music was doing at this time as well. An album that then was like super, super important to me, and it's only become more and more important to me. I would consider it even still today one of my 10 favorite albums of all time, probably. And every single time I listen to it, I'm blown away by how much is going on, like throughout the entire record, but how coherent it always is, even when it's in the pursuit of chaos. And that's really like something that is, the more you sort of pay attention to what's happening, the more of a marvel it is that it all works as well as it does, because there's so much. I mean, one of the big themes of the album is sort of you're being a person who is falling apart completely, who is on a downward spiral to the absolute bottom and the end of hope, essentially. And to capture that feeling in a way that's not totally a real dreary, morose experience, but actually an active, exciting, and kind of intense and almost anxiety inducing experience, but just one that keeps you locked in. A lot of specific aspects to what Trent is doing on this album that I want to get into, but that's my broad overview of like it really clicked with me and then taught me to appreciate music in a new way. And it sort of is something that I still come back to as one of the most impressive and exciting albums I've ever heard.
Luke, what about you in terms of like our personal history with it? I feel the need to highlight it, especially with this album, just because this is such a seminal release, like for the band, for the world of music. So I know that this album can kind of come into your life completely irrespective of, getting into Nine Inch Nails. Sometimes you just become a music nerd and canonical albums just kind of fall in your lap. So, do you have a particular experience with the Downward Spiral that you would like to highlight?
It was interesting, I'd say, because like you sort of described the idea of canonical albums just sort of dropping in your lap. Weirdly enough, I'd listened to a lot of Nine Inch Nails before I'd even listened to the Downward Spiral, and I think that was
Same.
just a case. I guess that's just like a case of the circumstances of which I was introduced to them, which is via film score rather than them as
Yep.
regular rock musicians. So I knew about it. Like I'd seen that album cover. It's like one of those album covers that,
Oh,
like
yeah.
Abbey Road, you see that and you're just, that's an album. That is like the album. I just
Hmm.
have not listened to it yet to know what is behind those images. And I think it's kind of interesting because that image, though not very specific, is very like representative of the album as a whole. But interestingly, like besides the songs that everyone knew, I didn't really know much of any of the tracks on this. And so my first go around with it was kind of a bit, the experience of like someone hypes up something to you as like the best thing in the world. So you kind of come into it with the preconceived notions of this is the best thing in the world.
Yep.
You kind of have like a bit of, okay, I see the vision of it, but not entirely yet. So it took me like several listens. Oh yeah, I see what this is throwing down and think that it is extremely effective. And honestly, like numerous songs on this are probably some of my absolute favorite things that Nine Inch Nails have ever done. That being said, I still have a couple of tracks that I'm just those function, but they don't entice me as strongly, but they're at least sonically interesting, if nothing else.
I think that it's important that you make that distinction because this is a distinct departure from a lot of the song structures that we saw on Pretty Hate Machine, which, despite the fact that that album does vary it up with some of those songs in terms of the level of energy that are in those songs, and, kind of switching back to something that's a little bit more scaled back with like Something I Can Never Have, for instance. This is an album where it feels like it can just kind of oscillate between true blues song structures and then just pure ambience. Like there are some parts of this album that just feel like you are meant to immerse yourself in the sound rather than pay maybe active attention to what is happening in terms of like the instrumental mechanisms of what's going on, which I think paints a pretty distinct portrait of perhaps where Trent Reznor was at the time. This will have a little bit of overlap with the narrative that we put down before on the last episode, but basically the in the early days of Nine Inch Nails touring, mainly the Downward Spiral was conceptualized after they had toured the records, specifically at things like Lollapalooza in 1991. And basically Reznor was talking about like the themes and the lyrics that he was writing about, and initially wanted to record the album in New Orleans and even searched for and moved to, as we discussed in the last episode, 150 Cielo Drive in Los Angeles, the Manson murder house, renting it for $11,000 a month from July 1992 to the start of making both Broken and The Downward Spiral. So this is coming right off of the back of the previous EP, which is that big kind of, again, sonic departure from the first record. That's something a little bit more incendiary and big and atmospheric, something that goes for broke in a way that the first album didn't quite. But the Downward Spiral, funnily enough, for as we're talking about it being this really extreme album, it has like there's a lot of controversy wrapped up in it. And this was an album that came off of the cultural backbone of just sort of like there's kind of a very big reactionary conservative movement as more forms of alternative music are coming into view, especially in America. You have things like the Tipper Gore censorship campaign and all of that. We're still kind of reeling from this. So you would think that something like this would be racked with so much controversy that it wouldn't be successful, but that is not the case at all. This went into the Billboard Top 200 at number 2 and is in fact the band's most successful album in the US. 4 million copies sold, 5 million copies sold worldwide. And honestly, something that I was picking up on in just my last re-listen of this is really more lyrically in an obvious way, but I was really picking up some themes and some lyrical motifs where I was just like, the way that Trent writes on this album It sure does remind me of Roger Waters. It really reminds me of Animals. It really reminds me of The Wall. And of course, he cites Roger Waters' Pink Floyd as one of the main inspirations for this album, alongside the music of David Bowie, as a matter of fact. And this is naturally, it's what it says on the tin. The Downward Spiral is, I wouldn't quite say a true blue concept album, but it is a narrative sort of journey of what it is like to lose your mind, essentially, from Trent Reznor. And of course, we're having some people who Trent worked with on the periphery on the previous projects come back. We have producer Flood, who's co-producing some stuff. Alan Moulder mixed most of the album, and Reznor invited people like Sean Bavon to work on the Downward Spiral as well. And there were some people who contributed to remixes that eventually would be further down the spiral that they would release later on. And this would also kind of coalesce with some of these collaborators. We were mentioning how Trent and Marilyn Manson were actually kind of fostering a bit of a friendship that was more of a mentor-mentee relationship that was going to be a little bit more relevant after this album and a little bit before The Fragile would come into view. But some of the collaborators worked with Marilyn as well. So it kind of really shows you what this scene was developing into at the time. Like Nothing Records was actually becoming a legitimate industry force now just because of this continued success that these guys were having. So basically, that's more or less the presage to what we've got here. And another thing is that this album is wrapped up in a lot of ideas about addiction, a lot of ideas about, depression, a lot of, you can basically, I think I said it in the last episode that this is an album that feels like it's soaked in heroin. And yeah, for the most part, certainly. Again, we wouldn't quite see the excess of that drug use and stuff bleed in until The Fragile, I think, and then that kind of fits into Trent's overall narrative as an artist. But this is an album that's about mental destruction. It's about violence. It's about internalizing violence, and it's about internalizing it and then externalizing it in its second half. It does kind of have an A-B structure to it, for as much as something like this that just sort of mentally unspools can even have. And it's not necessary that we go track by track, but I do think it best to explore this particular album to go in a more or less consecutive fashion to sort of
Agreed.
talk about the things that stand out to us and what have you, starting off with something like Mr. Self-Destruct, which, man, this album leaves a hell of a first impression, doesn't it?
It's such a, I can remember hearing this. I don't know if it was the first time or if I'm sort of like creating a memory in retrospect, but I can remember hearing this and the opening sounds, which are actually like sampled from, I don't remember which movie it is, but it's
It
sampled
was
from a movie.
THX 1138.
Right, there we go.
Really?
There
I
you
was
go.
actually going to ask if anybody knew that because I was always like, why does it just sound like somebody's hitting a mattress in a factory with a lead
Yeah,
pipe? Like, what's
yeah.
going on here?
I haven't seen THX 1138, but it is like it sounds like someone getting their shit beaten in,
Hmm.
basically. And then it's like,
Yeah.
but it's like distorted as well, and it's sort of crackling and manipulated. And then of course the iconic sound, like the iconic tearing like sheet metal sound of the guitars on this album, which you got a taste of on Broken, right? Like Broken
Hmm.
was a really important release because it's a stepping stone between, not, I wouldn't say conventional synth pop on Pretty Hate Machine, but it was much more like of the oeuvre of synth pop. I mean, again, working with Flood, who produced a bunch of Depeche Mode albums, had that influence, right? And that was something that he was really kind of consciously aping on Pretty Hate Machine, but also like trying to pull in the industrial sounds of like no wave and in like meld that into synth pop. But here it's sort of like there's much more of a focus on rock instrumentation sort of being manipulated and processed through sort of electronic synthesizers and machines, basically. I don't claim to be a tech whiz, but this is where the focus is shifted, basically. And you could interpret that as being part partially the influence of the burgeoning grunge movement as well. Rock music had a new face at this particular point in time compared to where it was at in Pretty Ape Machine, where you were like so still like soaked in 80s like cheesy silliness compared to the much more sort of grounded like preoccupations of rock music in the early 90s, which were much more sort of psychological, which were much more sort of inward looking, which were much darker. Your bands like Soundgarden and Alice in Chains, like not if not outright in the sound, certainly in the spirit and the sort of focus on internal pain and suffering through the writing and through the sound design. That was obviously a cloud that was hanging over Trent in terms of like influences and envisioning the sound of this. And I just love it was actually like one of the aspects of the album when I was a kid that took the most work to get into because it's so abrasive. But that sheet metal guitar sound, I've come to absolutely love it so
Oh, it's
much.
so good.
And you have it like against these sort of like pummeling digitized bass drum kicks that are just like absolutely pushing the song forward completely. And another aspect as well that's basically highlighted by the intro going into the guitar part but continues to recur throughout the song and throughout the album is these loud quiet dynamics that they go for. Alan Moulder mixed this, and Alan Moulder came to fame essentially working with bands like My Bloody Valentine and Riot and like shoegaze bands who were kind of like pushing the envelope forward in terms of like how can we manipulate guitar sounds in a really really interesting way. And you have that, so that's a conscious choice to bring someone like him on board as well to emphasize the strangeness of these sounds, like to push them further than they had been pushed before. But the dynamics is something that really comes into play right away. This like sense that these songs could shift from these overwhelmingly loud sequences to like real empty solitude quiet, on a dime basically, and they could shift back at any point. So you get a sort of tension that comes from, when is this album going to explode? And then when it does pull back from a loud section, that almost has the same amount of shock to it because you're just sort of like, whoa. And so Mr. Self-Destruct introduces all of that beautifully and really sets the album up.
I have to very much agree with like all that sentiment. I think it is such like an interesting way to start up, not just because of the opening sample, but because of the minute the sample ends, it's not like a lot of songs that would use a sample would kind of like slowly ease into the song itself, but this one just kind of immediately bursts through the wall with it,
Yeah, well,
just
like
like the first sounds.
with like this rhythmic pattern that I don't even know if I could full-throatedly call a drum pattern because it's just this concussive like bum 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 bum. Like it's like the BPM is immediately fucking sky high. And of course we have Trent with that like we kind of emphasized what made him such a unique performer in that last episode, and he's got that like upper vocal register, strained, clenched teeth, the I am the voice inside your head. And then like I
Yeah.
think that there's not a world of difference between how confident of a performer he is. I think that that's one of the greatest strengths Trent has as a performer is that from day one he's always been this completely just singular presence that I can't really compare anybody wholly to. But on here, it's like not only is he still embodying that individuality, he also knows how to use it better. It's like Ryley said with the dynamics of the album. It is actively using his voice, his delivery. Like it'll fade out his voice to the point where you can barely hear it on some of these songs. And then, it'll come in and then sometimes it's blown out and distorted even more than the guitars are. So it's not just Trent sort of, doing what makes him great. It is learning how to use himself in a way that's a bit more tactful and artful. It's an album that's so the sound of it is so disorganized and so angry that you might, take for granted how intentional a lot of the layering and a lot of the dynamics actually are. But when I go back and listen to it, that's like the thing that stands out the most to me is that it feels like such a on a volume level, it's such a curated experience. Like you can tell that this was something that they really, really focused on in the production end of things. Like, and not to mention, this is 5 years apart from the debut, technically speaking. I know that there's less time between this and Broken, but like Trent had evolved significantly since that debut. And it's not necessarily in how the sound or Trent shifts, but how skillfully he's able to apply it.
Cool detail here I'll just mention real quick that because I forgot to mention it before is this is actually one of two songs featuring none other than Mr. Adrian Belew contributing. I think he's actually playing the guitar on this song.
I had
Uh,
no idea. Wow.
Which, if you go back and you listen to Adrian Belew's contributions, I mean, obviously with King Crimson is the big
Hmm.
one, right? Then it makes complete sense. Adrian Belew is one of my favorite guitarists of all time, and he's also like someone who, in a lot of ways, disrespects the instrument. Like he likes to create these really squalling, noisy tones, and really kind of like push the instrument to the edge of palatability. So it makes total sense that they would link up for this. There's only two songs that he's credited on. The other one's The Becoming, which is we'll get to. That's a very
Yeah.
again, an expert example of Trent pulling his influences and in some cases actually getting to integrate them into the performance of the record.
I was going to say something that you kind of touched on a little bit in terms of like where this place is after Broken, is that I kind of think of this as taking the elements of Broken with more polish, but not really like sacrificing any of the experimentation like going forward. There's so much more cleaner sound and choice of vocals as you were discussing, but then you also have the vocal distortion and some choices probably later on that we'll get to that really kind of emphasize, no, they're not just having the polished studio album for their second go around.
It's always sound that feels very legible, even in its illegibility, if that makes sense. Like it is something that you are always certain that the people behind this album, they wanted you to feel a certain way at a certain moment. And I think that that's actually beautifully exemplified as the transition between Mr. Self-Destruct and Piggy, is you have Mr. Self-Destruct being this big, like, oh, wow, this is, the revving industrial throttling and Trent's intense delivery. And then you go straight into Piggy, which starts off as like almost like near silence, and it's got like this stiff, groovy bass line to it. And you've got his reserved, kind of careful, almost seductive delivery of the lyricism. And it's such a strange mode to shift into. And we have a song that's a little bit more dynamic when it comes to the energy of what it's putting down.
The most memorable part of this song for me is always the drum solo, which is actually played by Trent himself. Trent's like performs almost all of the instruments on this album, except for some of those like Adrian Belew when he steps in, and a few other points of which he has other contributors. But the vast majority of instrumentation on this album is all Trent, except for the drums for the most part. The most part of the drumming is done by Chris Vrenna. I think there's another couple of drum credits as well, because Trent's just not very good at the drums. It's just not where his strengths lie. He's much better at like instruments where the focus is more texture and melody. But he does perform the drum solo in this song, and it's one of the most interesting like parts of the album to me, because it's obviously like it's a little bit slapdash. It doesn't really have much, like there's not really much time to it. There's not really
Not a lot of
much
structure.
like, no, it's just sort of like someone fucking around on the drums, and you can sort of tell that it is, but it adds so much character to the song's progression, because it does start fairly straightforwardly, and then by the end of it, it is this sort of like this sense of normality has started to crumble, and you're getting someone whose whole psyche is fractured basically, and it's just a really cool way to integrate that into the song. This isn't one of my absolute favorite songs on the record. It's probably my least favorite on like the first half, even though I still love it, but I really love what it adds at this point, and the way that it lets you sort of pull back and breathe a little bit after Mr. Self-Destruct, but while still advancing the narrative.
I kind of agree with the sentiment. It's probably my least favorite track as well. And it's a weird case of a song that I think I like the live versions of much more than the studio version, because I think every time they do it live, they get to sort of add and just sort of improvise with like a lot of fun stuff to it. Whereas when you're listening to the studio version, it's kind of like, well, this is the baseline version of what it is, and it's good. It's good.
I get you. And I do think that there is a little bit to, especially the lyricism on this song, because it sort of introduces the idea of, the titular Piggy, the idea of Trent referring to this other character, this other presence, this other thing as a pig, and it very much goes in with the imagery of the album. There is a lot of talk of a kind of master-slave dynamic on this record that is not exactly fixed. Like on some songs, it will appear as though Trent is the aggressor, and on other songs, it will appear as though he is the subjugated. And the songs kind of, it just kind of depends on what the energy of the song calls for, that sort of translates into what the writing is. But on this song, it's sort of just a way to deflect, to transfer blame, to project sort of all your negative impulses onto this idea of the pig, some animal that's often associated with greed and often associated with slaughter. And I feel like those sort of that feeds what the album is talking about when it comes to, picking up on some of the themes of something like Pretty Hate Machine when it comes to the actual, industrialization is not exactly a theme that I would say primarily affects this album. It's a way more internal record, but it is still using the kind of, archetypes and just the ideas that were already existing within the framework of industrial music to kind of do something that is a little bit more internal, to kind of probe and mine his own brain, his own psyche for this particular purpose. And I think it suits it really well. Like it is definitely a song that is less a song in and of itself and more of a bridging of a gap between two more major moments, because after Piggy we have, and I'm not gonna say my favorite, because when doing, retrospectives like these and covering a band's entire career, I feel like if I say this too early on, I might discover another song I have a renewed appreciation for later down the line. But like as of right now, Heresy, I think, is the best song that Nine Inch Nails have ever made. And I know that it's because this is like a really, like, there's a lot of really edgy content on a song like Heresy, but have you considered that it fucking slams for a second?
Well, here's the thing, right? As I think sometimes, especially early on in like the first listen or two of an album like this, the noise and the busyness of it, I think can distract from what is one of the album's greatest strengths to me, which is how much actually like really cool melodic stuff is
Yeah.
happening on almost all of these songs. Like there's
Mm-hmm.
about like three or four different melodies that worm their way through this song, like
Mm-hmm.
counter melodies, like little bits and pieces that overdubbed guitars are adding, the synthesizers itself, like the vocals. There's a lot of great melodic stuff, and Trent is really, really talented at melody. That to me is
Oh
one of the
yeah.
things that separates him from some of his peers, someone like Marilyn Manson, for instance, who made some great music around this time, but didn't have quite the same melodic sensibility as Trent does. And Heresy to me is like from a production standpoint and from a like musicality standpoint, to me, this is one of the richest songs on the album because there's so many like dicky, hooky little melodic things that are happening. Just adding texture, adding kind of space to the song, and it's really really cool. And it's interesting as well because like the chorus is in some ways like the least melodically interesting part of the song. He has all of this like really interesting stuff happening, kind of decorating the texture of most of the song, and then you get to the chorus and it's just this slamming industrial guitar and these repeated lines about God is dead and no one cares. It's a great
God
chorus, don't get me
is
wrong, but it
dead.
is like where it's where the different layers of the song that are kind of like dancing together with each other sort of collapse into this slamming kind of counterpoint. Really, really cool song. Love it.
Big agree on this one. Not necessarily that it's my favorite song, but I do think there's just like individual bits of it that like really hit extremely hard. The one thing I find kind of fun is that the first few seconds of it, it does feel like, oh, this is sort of reminiscent of Pretty Hate Machine at first with its like drum sound. But as it goes on, then you almost kind of see the full current evolution happen throughout the first like minute of this song, I kind of feel. And I also agree the delivery of God is dead, no one cares, and if there's a hell, I'm gonna see you there. That's probably one of my favorite bits of just I don't know if necessarily like lyricism, but just like the performance from Trent Reznor on that. It's also probably one of my favorite moments from when I got to see them live, just hearing, because a weirdly cathartic thing to hear an entire audience of people shout
Oh.
that out.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't even think about that, but like getting to join that in a sort of gang vocal sense, like the community there is honestly like a really like an interesting way for that to play. I very much agree. I think that this song, it basically it's the first moment on the album where you're basically like, oh yeah, this is the guy who did Pretty Hate Machine, because the sort of sticky hooky quality of the lyrics is still within this album, which is this, miasma of awful shit, but it's something that is able to convey its erratic nature without completely dispelling Trent's strengths as like a core songwriter and somebody who structures songs, like the way that the melodic like nature of this song that just kind of weaves in and out of itself. And I also just like there is kind of a not a profound, but like I like the way, in which Trent writes this song as simultaneously acknowledging a god and denying its existence and worshiping a god and also, decrying it as heretical. Like this is a song that is completely about contradictions and hypocrisy. It's not a song that's meant to make logical sense. It's meant to make emotional sense because that's where he's coming from with, these points that people like him, people like Manson in the early 90s, they were stirring the pot a little bit trying to make these points about religion, which frankly have aged better than a lot of things like that should, but we don't need to talk about that. But it is very like it is kind of unintentionally, I find it very skillful in how it portrays the subject matter. And it
Mm.
feels like just because the kind of you hear it and it feels kind of like a juvenile expression at first, but when you juxtapose literally everything that Trent says in the song against itself, it actually does, I think, make a greater kind of web of ideas that makes the song a little bit more interesting. But
It,
the
it's a
the main
very
appeal of the song is that it just bangs.
Well, it's a very political song. Like it's actually
Hmm.
kind of like so there's this the main mode of this album is this sort of interior dialogue that Trent's having, this kind of interior crisis. And I think that I meant to mention this on Piggy, but sort of we'll get to it now, I guess. Those first two songs, like Mr. Self-Destruct, the I in that song, the perspective of that song is almost this antagonistic force within Trent that's kind of like pushing
Yeah.
him to this sort of place of hatred and self-destruction. And then Piggy is almost like a rebuttal to that. It's like almost like him addressing that darker part of himself and saying, I need something. What are you going to give me to fill this sort of emptiness inside of me? Because
Yes.
I will take anything at this point. And here it's interesting because it's one of the few moments in the album where I feel like there's a break from that narrative to do something that's a little bit more, I would say, I guess, a conventional sort of song, but it is very sharply political. I mean, listen to these lyrics. He sewed his eyes shut because he's afraid to see. He tries to tell me what I put inside of me. He's got the answers to ease my curiosity. He dreamed a god up and called it Christianity. He flexed his muscles to keep his flock of sheep in line. He made a virus that would kill off all the swine. His perfect kingdom of killing, suffering, and pain demands devotion and atrocities done in his name. Like it's a very blanketly political song about the American war machine. At a point in time where that would only become more and more like that would be obviously in the Bush era that would become to be a huge part of American like mainstream songwriting. It wasn't really a part of the culture in the 80s, even though you had like Reagan and you had a lot of artists who were sort of like talking about that sort of thing, but not so much in the sphere that would cross over with mainstream pop culture. And it's like the cool thing about this album and what Trent is doing here is like this is the only point in time really where an album could be doing the sort of things that this album is doing, the writing this album has, and have a remote chance to be
Yep.
like successful in the mainstream and have that level of crossover. Obviously it required a huge PR push and there's a lot of label stuff going on to bring songs like like Wish from the Broken EP and like Closer, for instance, which we're about to get to, like into the mainstream. But it's still like you can't it's difficult to fathom another point in time other than the mid 90s, the sort of in the immediate wake of grunge's crossover, where music that's this volatile and antagonistic and sort of like blanketly political, but also so like angry, raw rage, like directed both inward and outward, having that level of success. And obviously a lot of bands would come in the wake of Nine Inch Nails and do that sort of thing in the later 90s and 2000s, but there would be a lot more shallowness to those bands and the way they were doing those things, which is not to talk smack on anyone, but like
No.
again, it's this perfect storm moment where you have someone who's like so obsessed with the possibilities of the studio and of like pushing all of the different things that he's working with to their absolute maximum, while also writing these brutal and difficult to listen to lyrics, and it all being able to be something that could have any level of mainstream success.
And it's the mid 90s, which puts us a good deal away from Pretty Hate Machine. And what are we at the dawn at culturally in the 90s, other than, the idea of like counterculture and, alternative music rising up? The internet. Music like this, even if people wanted to stop it, now there was no way to feasibly do that. It was going to spread no matter what happened just because of the new ecosystem that was beginning to thrive. It's like you have people who at the end of the 90s are going to start trying to pirate like Eminem albums on LimeWire, and what do you think they're going to do after that? They're probably going to go and download a Nine Inch Nails album too, and a Metallica album because fuck you, Lars Ulrich. So it all kind of feeds together in how like we're slowly approaching the 2000s monoculture, and it feels like Trent rid that wave in such a perfect way that it just kind of like, all the stars just sort of lined up to be able to make this album that when you listen to it today, yeah, it should not have been an album that goes platinum in any context, and yet here we sit, and not to mention it being probably one of the most influential albums we've ever covered on this entire channel, full stop. And as we march forward to March of the Pigs, I want to single out this song for having one of like, if I could isolate three of my favorite singular moments on this album, this is easily in that top three of the, you have the song is progressing, it's loud, it's angry, it's aggressive, and then you have the absolute like halting abrupt stop of the little piano motif, and doesn't it make you feel better?
It sounds like an advertising
Yeah,
jingle.
it does. Like when I listened to it these past two times, when I listened to it yesterday, when I listened to it today, I was like, back when I was younger and I listened to this part, I was always just like, oh, it's fucked up because it's like it's sort of like silent, and then there's sort of a different shift in how this sound, comes up against the other. It's because of the comparison that it sounds weird. And now I'm like, this sounds more demented than the rest of the song does. It feels like you're listening to Trent sing with a big smile on his face and his eyes wide open, and you're just kind of like, go back to the industrial noise part. That was actually freaking me out a little bit less. And I just love that little subversion that happens in the song
Mm.
multiple times.
I think it's because this song is about consumerism, right?
Hmm.
Like step up pigs, come and feed, It's a song, there's not a lot of like subtlety to it, but that's kind of the point. It's sort of about the huddled consuming masses, buying and buying and buying and all that sort of stuff. And then I think the contrast there, doesn't it make you feel better, is meant to sound like a sort of advertising jingle because it's sort of in a very ironic and sort of satirical way. It's sort of poking fun at, you are consumers, all you do is consume, 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 and doesn't it make you feel better? What are you getting from that? Is it filling the sort of malaise that you feel in your suburban life? That a very sort of common theme and more and metal music around this time as well, sort of poking fun, or not poking fun, but like really trying to probe at suburban life and American consumerist society. That to me is what this song is all about. But yeah, it's absolutely baller. I love them. Have you guys seen the music video for this, where
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
just
I
like
have.
they're playing in like a white room and Trent's just sort of like just careening all over the place?
Yeah.
So iconic.
That he looks so wiry. Like I'm so used to my first images of Nine Inch Nails were like, funnily enough, I think the first part of it I experienced was the Social Network soundtrack just because I saw the movie. But when I went and listened to Nine Inch Nails for the first time, the album I listened to was With Teeth. So the Trent Reznor I'm used to seeing is the muscle shirt, kind of slightly roided out, in shape, clean cut Trent Reznor. And then you go back and look at this Trent Reznor, and he just looks like this wiry Spider-Man with long black hair. And you're like, who the fuck is this guy? I don't remember this dude.
He's like the evolution from Twink to Dom Dad.
Appropriate considering the subject material.
True, very true. I was gonna say, I kind of honestly like the image I sort of see of this song with like the idea of the consumerism angle of it is almost extremely frantic, just like destructive noise that goes on as he's like, yelling, "Step right up," is like
Oh yeah, it's
almost
good.
like the daily toll of what you need to get to kind of keep your life afloat. And the little, doesn't it make you feel better, is like the brief moment of euphoria that you might have when you're like, it was worth it. Then the next day, then it's just step right
All
up.
over
Well,
again.
it's probably sticking the heroin needle in for
Mm.
Trent. Like that's probably also what it's supposed to musically evoke as well. I mean, I had this whole like consumerist interpretation, but of course, it's a great song, so you can read it through multiple different lenses.
I just kind of like it because I almost see this playing during the kind of franticness is playing during footage of a Black Friday Friday Walmart
I
just like
thought
recording.
I thought like the exact same thing. Like I don't know how long that's been a phenomenon, but once you get to a point where culture has broadcast itself to a kind of level where everybody is kind of aware of everything happening all the time, how do you, as a native Midwesterner from fucking nowhere, Ohio, see something like that and not think, wow, this is the death throes of civilization as we know it? Like you kind of get where he's, and I mean, like, not to mention, I don't even think that your specific interpretations are even contradictory. I think the idea of capitalism and heroin both being a drug is this album. That's just what this is all about. Of course, we are
Multifaceted.
leaning into a more specific part of what this album, what you can interpret from it with. I mean, is I would say Closer's the biggest song on this album, right? Like it's like at this
I
point,
mean, I would say that Closer is the biggest Nine Inch Nails
it's
song.
gotta be. Like it's gotta be. And it's
Yeah.
so strange. It's one of those songs that you come back to. You've heard it 1,000 times. You come back to it before, and it's like I can't say that I listen to Closer, as much as I listen to other big songs from big bands that I love like this, just because, it's not exactly a song that suits all moods and forms. You're not driving down the highway always, and you're just like, yeah, you know what could go right now? The Downward Spiral and Closer. That's what I want to listen to on my way to work. But you put this on, and it's just every fucking thing about this is so iconic. That kind of stuttering beginning to it, where she's like, boom, boom, and the kind of wavy synthesizers that appear kind of later when Trent's got the "You can't have isolate." Like it's
Yeah.
so every part of this song is weird and fucked up and feels like it shouldn't work, and yet has become so entrenched into the culture that birthed it that it's so like this is just so classic. Every sound in this song feels perfect. I came away with a very strange renewed appreciation for something that I feel like I may have taken for granted. It's so fucking good. It's so perfect.
Mm.
In a lot of ways, it feels like this was maybe the first song that really like it made me think about music production and like how
Mm,
it matters and like what it is doing in a song. Because there's just again the layering of the different instrumentations, the way that different things that are kind of emphasizing the melody and offering counter to it are sort of like building up around the song. And especially, that back half of the song that I mentioned before, where you're sort of forced to sort of pay attention to those things. Um, it's so fascinating. Like there's this like my favorite little thing in the song is this recurring sound that's like over thick recurs through most of the song actually, but it's a big part of the back half, and it sounds like this bird whistling, but it's like
yeah.
processed and pitched, and it
Hmm.
sounds like
Mm.
really really strange, and it just there's something about that sound that like tickles my brain and does this weird thing to me where it's sort of what's funny about it is like it actually makes the song a lot more unnerving and like just sort of like uncomfortable to listen to because it's such a piercing sound, but it like completely makes the whole thing for me. Trent has sort of bemoaned, I think, the extent to which this is talked about, or like the way that the song has sort of been misrepresented as a song about being, lustful and sexually horny, when really it's just a song about self-loathing and self-hatred,
Yeah.
and basically all your relationships being dysfunctional to the point where you can only see reflected in someone else your own failings. Yeah, in a weird way, I think if for all of the "I want to fuck you like an animal" shit, it's a weirdly moving song. I think if you start to pay attention to some of the lyrics, you can have my isolation, you can have the hate that it brings, you can have my absence of faith,
Can
you can
have my
have my everything.
everything.
Help me tear down my reason. It's your sex I can smell. Help you make me perfect. Help me become somebody else. Yeah, it's a really like it's a particularly moving song at this particular point in the album, and yet at the same time, it's so propulsive and danceable. Like it has this constant you want to fucking kick to this song. It absolutely
It's got a
um
gothy club vibe to it for sure.
yeah, and it's like you simultaneously see the influence of like electronic dance music from all the way back in the 70s, and also I think hip hop in this song as well,
Yeah.
specifically in the drum
Very
sounds.
much.
Like some of the like the snare and the bass drum sounds, I feel like are really, obviously following from what was happening in hip hop in the late 80s and early 90s, the and the hip hop drum sounds, which is like something that I think will become even more of an influence going forward as well. I mean, on The Fragile, you have a song where Dr.
Dr.
Dre is a
Dre.
co-production credit, you know?
Yep.
So there's
Huh.
some sheer DNA going on
Did
there
you
as
not know
well.
that, Luke?
I did not know that.
Yeah, we'll be talking in depth about that when we get to it. The my favorite production detail on this song is how you have the first chorus and the second chorus. And on the first chorus, it's where it's like the synths in the background of when Trent says, I wanna fuck you like an animal, and then the whoop, whoop, whoop. And then the second
Yes.
time that's repeated, it's pitched up way higher and sounds like it's skin crawling. Like that is the most icky part of the song to me is that it just sounds like someone sampled a siren and put it through this like high pass filter, and it sounds wrong, but in a way that I like. It really adds something to the urgency and to the immediacy of the song. You feel like as it progresses, it's just, you're watching somebody who is just like manic and completely unraveling before you and just is like, I need to do something. Like I need to connect. Like I actually like the kind of profound reading that Ryley has for it because it's like, what is the song about? Like, what's it called? It's called Closer. It's about wanting to feel more than you do by connecting with someone else. It is just an incredibly perverse way of trying to connect to another person so that you can feel better about yourself, which is like, yeah, that's quite sad.
Yeah, it's also
That's
just about like being so emotionally stunted by your depression and self-loathing
That
that
you
your
think
only
that's what you
avenues,
need.
like the only way you have an avenue to connect with someone is in the most sort of like base and cheap and like instant thrill, no sort of greater
Hmm.
depth way possible, because that's sort of how drug addiction like fucks you with your mind. You only learn the only things that are pleasurable are things that you can get instantly, and there's no real like concept of delayed gratification. That's the relevance of sex here. It's not about like becoming, a pervert because you are antisocial. It's just like it's self-loathing and self-hatred and wanting to feel good in the fastest way possible.
It is interesting to think about all the things we just talked about and the fact that this was, oh yeah, this is the song everyone listened to, because from my perspective, this is one of those songs that's just felt like it's always been there.
Hmm.
Because again, from the perspective of I listened to this when I was like super young, I did not interpret those lyrics because I could not think of it then. But like when the point in time when I actually like knew about Nine Inch Nails and listened to these lyrics, it was really interesting because the song that I had a real just like, oh yeah, that vibe is just so cool. When the lyrics actually kind of hit me in the way that it's supposed to, I kind of felt sick actually at first. I was like, oh shit, wait. That's what this is about. I didn't even realize that. Repeated listens to it is just so kind of interesting. It's a weird thing of we're talking about contradictions. I think that's very like true in this case, probably more than any other song, where the just unnerving sort of sadness and just like desperation of what's being conveyed here, but also the weird fun of it at the
Hmm.
same time, which I think is probably sort of purposeful in some way. I think Trent's kind of the moment of it is just the fact that people just only look at it in the fun way, but not in like the way it's supposed to have both sides of these things at the same time.
There's a breadth there that I definitely think, like, if I were Trent, I would also kind of be like, well, that's kind of a shallow way to engage with a song that's kind of got a lot going on. But like, you want to talk about contradictions, is that I remember once I think I maybe wore a Nine Inch Nails shirt, and my very, very Catholic godmother was like, "Oh, I love Nine Inch Nails," and I was like, "Really, you do?" Oh. And she was just like, yeah, what's your favorite song? And I was just like, I just kind of listed off whatever I listed. And she said one of her favorite songs was Closer. I was just like, what do you expect me to do with that? I have no clue. So, I mean, that just goes to show you how these songs can
Hmm.
just, they can embed themselves in culture, and people can just, it's just very, sometimes songs being about what they're about doesn't even matter. It's
I,
just in how catchy and immediate they are.
I just had the dumbest thought. I like that song because he says I'm getting closer to God. Like
Like
Yeah,
Jesus.
Jesus.
guy who just listens to the song and like just glazes over every line except for
We're
"You Get
closer
Me
to
Closer to
God.
God."
Just like, oh well,
Yeah,
that's nice. All this other stuff's pretty bad, but like at least he gets there at the end. That's the
Yeah.
important
yeah,
part.
yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it is kind of Catholic coded if you look at it
I
that way,
mean,
but I don't know.
listen, if we want to go into the like weird sort of dual psychology of how suffering and divine reward works, the Nine Inch Nails is very Catholic music in that regard.
Speaking of which, this is a very like basic thought, but like one time when I was listening to this, I thought this album is like the musical equivalent of the Piss Christ artwork.
You know,
Well,
I don't hate that. And if we continue along, we go to the song after Closer, which is Ruiner, which, in my opinion, I think this might be the most underrated song on this album. I really fucking love Ruiner, mainly because I think this is maybe one of the most prosaically written songs on here. Like, this is a bona fide screed that Trent puts down on here. And it is, I mean, haunting it kind of feels like I'm not doing it adequate justice, honestly, especially when you consider how the song sounds too in
just
concert with it.
again, just one of the most unreal like sound design exercises on this album. Just the how atonal and scrolling it is. And I mean, I share your sentiment with regards to the lyrics. I mean, it's very much a like not counterpoint. It's very much like a kind of piggy where it's sort of like addressing some sort of dark force and you can interpret that dark force in a number of different ways. You could interpret it as another part of this sort of like dialogue between him, between his sort of like conscience, or between his soul, or between like the part of him that sort of wants to be free and the part of him that wants to kind of subsume itself in this sort of like hedonistic destructive lifestyle. And I think a lot of the songs where there's like an IU addressing between like two figures work really well through that lens of like it's a song about someone who has a sense of self-awareness constantly through making all of these bad decisions that they make that bring them lower and lower and lower, but still can't help themselves, still is sort of in the thrall of this like force that they can't control. And they only can hope to sort of like appease it, to sort of like do what it wants, or to try and like ration it, like reason with it to try and get themselves out of it. And there's a
Reasoning with
real
was
like,
how I would put it too. Like when I was
yeah,
listening to it, it sounds like Trent is like literally having almost a rhetorical argument with a version of God in this song. Like he's just kind of shouting at it and just sort of like bemoaning it and being like, "Is this what you expect from me? Is this what you expect from?" And there's something just very helpless about it that feels like it comes at the perfect moment after Closer, where it's like you have that moment of trying to seek intimacy that makes you feel better, and then you kind of finally find yourself at the end of your rope with Ruiner, where you're just kind of like, what is there? What is this? What am I? What are you? It's awesome.
Very much agree. This was a special song because this was actually what opened up a performance that I saw live, but it was just
Ooh.
Trent on the piano in the little square in the middle of the stadium. So it was interesting coming back to this song to re-listen for this, just how both of those versions are really impactful and like strong. Like, I'm a big sucker for like quiet piano type shit, but like also just the original version is just so strong to me. I love the little squealing little like sample that keeps repeating at the beginning that sort of becomes a motif throughout. There's just a lot of I think it's like a nice mixture of not conventional, but like something like structured while also being experimental, kind of like a really good like half and half on that one that I really, really enjoy.
Yeah, it's sort of perfect because this is really the what I think is the turning point of the album. It's, we're halfway through the track list, and right, like the becoming feeds into, or not the becoming, but Ruiner feeds into the becoming, and the becoming is a song where the first lyric on it is kind of humorously, but I beat my machine, it's a part of me, it's inside of me, which is kind of like, oh, this is a kind of thing with masturbation. But it's like, if you consider what Closer is about, and then you have the I've arrived at the pentultimate, I have arrived at the apex and nothing is different, and then you transition to the becoming, it's almost like this is truly where the spiral actually begins because he's retreating more inward now. He's not seeking outward things to satiate what's wrong with him. He's just immediately going to himself and just sort of like, I am one with the filth now.
So The Becoming is my favorite song on this album.
Based choice. Based
Uh,
choice.
it's to me the most like in terms of production, in terms of like instrumentation, melody, like basically all of the musical elements. To me, this is like the most. I don't know if I would say it's the most impressive because I don't really know what that means in this context, but it's the one that just has the most impact for me. It's such a brutal song, musically, and but it has so much like beautiful layering of all of its different elements that are just so well integrated together. And lyrically, we've had previous songs that are this sort of like I, me, you sort of dialogue between Trent and some other like person, whether it's this actualized part of himself that represents his impulses and his vices and all that sort of stuff. And this song is almost like more of a appealing, like trying to describe it to the listener. It's like trying to
Yeah.
kind of, it's less of a dialogue and it's more of a like I'm trying to tell you what it's like and what this thing that I'm in the thralls of, this addiction, this depression, because it's always both together.
Hmm.
It's the addiction and the depression. It's almost like trying to describe them, and the writing in the song is so like impactful through that lens, this sense of like more and more becoming like less yourself and less in control of
Transformation. It's
yourself.
baptismal.
And the way that the sound design complements that is just so brilliant. There's like a point in the song about halfway through where you have this audio, and I don't know if this is actually true or if it's just one of those creepy
Urban legends.
rumors
Yeah.
that's kind of made its way into being true. But like there's this one part in the middle of the song where it's sort of doing the main verse and these sort of really hard-hitting like bass drums have come in, and there's this audio you can sort of hear over top of it all, and it sounds really strange. It sounds like distorted screaming wind and like just sort of the sound of I don't it's really hard to describe. You just hear it and it's really unsettling. And I read somewhere, and I don't think this is real, but I read somewhere, or if it is, maybe it's from a movie or something, but I read somewhere that it's like this dialogue of like a plane crash and like
Mm.
people screaming or something.
I was
And
actually
whatever
wondering if you knew that because I was listening to this earlier and I was like, what the fuck is that sound? I don't know.
that's what I
So,
read.
so I'm assuming you're just talking about kind of like the scream that plays throughout like most of the song, or is there a specific thing?
Maybe like I think part of it might be sampled and reused throughout the song, but there's like specific section where I feel like it's like so prominent. But
Hmm.
I don't know. Again, there's so many different things going on in the song. There's so many different layers. But yeah, I think the screaming comes from somewhere, and I read that it was like I don't actually remember. It was a long time ago that I read. But whatever it is, whatever the source is, it's like such a because it's already at the point where the song is sort of kind of overwhelming to listen to, and the only thing that keeps it all together is just how well like rhythmically structured it is, how like impressive the drums are. And of course you've got Adrian Belew on this song as well, playing a guitar that's probably knowing him he hooked through like three different amps and
Yeah.
15 different effects pedals, unrecognizable as the instrument. But yeah,
Imagining
it's
Adrian Belew standing in the middle of the house where the Sharon Tate murder happened, just fucking going to town on this thing is
and then
quite the mental image.
And at the end of the song, it's like he overdubs his own voice with like a higher pitched, sort of screechy
Yeah.
version of his voice to do that. It won't give up. It wants me dead. God damn this noise inside my head part. I love the continual escalation of the chaos and of the terror of this song. It's so, it's cool as shit, man. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like the song on the album that to me feels the most like it is the most industrial song on this album to me. It is also about Trent industrializing himself. He's got the lyric, the nature of my circuitry. He's talking about organic body parts becoming into machinery, becoming into electronic wiring and stuff. It is implying that he is whatever he's doing to himself right now, this act of whatever kind of self-harm he is engaging in, it is transforming into something that does not feel the same pain that he felt before. And that feels like the essence of what industrial music is to me.
And
Yeah,
one more tiny thing
very
I'll mention as
Tetsuo.
well is that there's a great stripped back version of this song on the album Still, which
Yes.
came out after The Fragile, which if you're going through the Nine Inch Nails discography, essential listening.
Oh, trust me, I already
It's
put it in the thumbnail. We'll be talking about it.
yeah, it's sort of like an extended EP more than an album, and but actually there's more original material on it than you might think. But
Mhm.
there are a few songs that are re-recorded for it. That and it also has to me what's the definitive version of Something I Can Never Have is on
Yep,
there as well. But
100%.
the
One of my
version of the
favorites.
Becoming on here is great as well because it's like a stripped back piano, rendition of the song, but it really also emphasizes that how the rhythmic elements of the song and the melodic elements of the song are like the same.
Yeah.
And it's really, really cool how the song's constructed in that way.
I really like that about a lot of the stripped back Nine Inch Nails songs is that you gain kind of a greater understanding of them by hearing the different versions. You just kind of, it allows you to appreciate them and gives you two great versions of an existingly awesome song. So that's one of those things that, like, if Nine Inch Nails fans have not dug into those EPs that are like, they are so much better than like remixes or just alternate takes that you might hear some bands have that they just kind of toss off. Like, no, that's like a project worth hearing that we will devote an entire segment discussing when we ultimately do get to it.
There's something I wanted to address with the Becoming, because this is really the only interesting thing I can add, because I do quite like this song, but also I am someone who occasionally has weak ears. So I that is
You said
me.
you were prone to overstimulation in the last episode, so I can imagine this song's a tough pill to swallow sometimes.
That's a me issue, not a song issue. But that being said, I will say, because you did mention like it was like a specific thing with the yell, but I will say the one thing I do know, and this is a very funny way to connect back to a podcast that I used to do, which is Mecha and Monster Mondays, that the
I
main
was on that.
scream, you were on that, and you were a great host. The specific scream that plays out through most of the song is from fucking Robot Jocks.
Really?
Yes, it's from
That's
Robot Jocks.
Okay,
Spec
so much
that's
less like
amazing.
so much of the mystique of the songs now been cruelly taken away from me.
Well, I mean, like, here's the thing, though. The context in which that sound effect comes from, though, is kind of bleak because it essentially is, to give, like, very basic context. Fucking American and Russian robot fighting that are representing the Cold War get into a horrific accident where they accidentally, like, blow up the audience stands, and that's where that
Oh,
sound effect comes
Oh.
from.
right.
Like I was actually listening to kind of prep for this. I was listening to the episode of Stephen Hyden's podcast Rivals, where he talks about the sort of falling out that Reznor and Manson would ultimately have. And there was a lot of time that those two spent in the studio, even like way before like the Fragile and stuff, like when he was kind of mentoring and producing Manson's albums, where they were just getting like doing whatever drug they had available in front of them and like watching movies and shit. So this 100% was born out of them like doing crystal meth and then watching Robot Jocks one evening and then Trent being like, "That'd be funny if we
Yeah.
just put that in the song," and they
Yeah.
just did it.
To be fair, I don't know if that many people who have listened to this album have even watched Robot Jock.
Or
So I mean,
know that
like
it is a movie that exists.
that is fair.
Go watch Red Letter Media. But
Yeah.
now we have crossed the threshold from the midpoint into I do not want this, which is afterwards, which is very much it's the counteract to the previous song of just, getting your wherewithal post transformation and then realizing that, well, what's the song called?
Yeah, it's almost like so there's this refrain in the song of like "Don't tell me how I feel." It almost feels like this is a moment in the progression of the album where he's sort of like trying to revolt against the sort of darker, impulsive, vicey part of himself. But it is like a really to me this is one of the least like tightly structured songs. It's a
Oh
little bit
yeah.
more there's a little bit more sort of like empty space in it and it's a little bit more kind of deconstructed. It's not one of my favorite songs on the album. It might even be my least favorite, but it functions in an interesting way to sort of like start to come down a little bit from because to me there's like a rise from Closer, Ruiner, and The Becoming. There's like a rise in energy across that 3 song stretch that's positively overwhelming. Like The Becoming is the most sort of chaotic song on this album. And so this is a sort of the most chaotic song of this album might actually be the very next one, which we'll get to in a
Yeah.
minute. But like
Still.
this is a point in the album where there's like a real sort of sense of things falling apart starts to kind of come into focus.
I just think the sound design of this song is really, really strong just because it has that kind of ebb and flow, sort of structureless vibe to it. So it has to kind of remain compelling for purely textural purposes. And it's where I see a lot of where Nine Inch Nails as a project goes in the future rather than specifically where it is right now. So I mean like it's not exactly my favorite moment on the album. Again, it's kind of more of those bridging the gap songs, but I have a weird kind of affinity for Big Man with a Gun, and I can't like explain why. It's like it's a really brief moment on the record. Like it's only like just a, it's a little bit north of a minute, I think. But the warbled scream that starts out this song,
Which I have an amazing detail about that for you. That
please.
scream is the scream of no less than Mr. Tommy Lee.
What?
Um, and and in the album booklet, I don't know if you're able to see this because it's so small, but it's blurry. But it's credited
Man.
like, okay, so it says Tommy Lee Steakhouse. I don't know what that means. I did a quick like Google online, and some people think that this is like a sample from a porn film. So I think there's a possibility that both of these things are true, and that it is a sample of Mr. Tommy Lee moaning in a porn film called Steakhouse. Or more likely, that's completely wrong, and this is just a total joke in the credits for some reason. I don't know.
Regardless,
Um,
it's awesome. Tommy Lee is on the credits for the Downward Spiral. Jesus
yeah,
Christ.
Damn.
contributing Steakhouse to this song,
Yeah.
Big Man with a Gun, whatever that means.
And
Um,
I think that this is also a song that was the focal point for some slight controversy considering its title. And also, this is the point at which, in the narrative of the album, the main character, Trent, loses control and, well, A and B put it together. What happens in the song?
Mm,
And
yeah.
which kind of warrants, honestly, if I can insert an opinion I remember hearing from Morgan, who similarly is a Nine Inch Nails fan and absolutely adores this album, is that we were just kind of talking about moments on this album years ago, and he said something along the lines of that like he was just like, I don't even think that hurt is like the most upsetting part of the Downward Spiral. He's like, I think that shit like A Warm Place is actually like, because of the structure of the album, that is something that like affects me more. And I like these last two listens of the album, I was just like, oh, I completely get what you mean. Because like in the narrative of this, like post the explosion of violence on Big Man with a Gun, A Warm Place is like this really kind of sedentary, internal, just stewing in what has brought you there. And it's so uncomfortable to just sit through the entire time.
well, like to me, this song is so cartoonish that it has to be like a piece of like parody, I think. And in that way, it occupies a weird space on the album. Uh, I don't like have any particular problem with what Trent is doing in terms of like the commentary of the song, but I do feel like the shifting gears into something that's so straight, like blatantly parodic. Like, I'm a big man, yes I am, and I have a big gun. Got me a big old dick, and I like to have fun. Like to me, it's like it's so obviously shooting for something, silly and humorous. But it does sort of like, I don't know, instrumentally it like works really, really well as it sounds really threatening and sort of terrifying. But I don't know. I'm not quite sure that it works. I do like, however, that it inspired none other than Senator Bob Dole specifically got mad about this song. Uh,
One of the most notorious failed politicians in the United States, Bob
mm,
Dole. And
um,
this is what
Bob
happens when
Dole.
you take arms against Nine Inch Nails. You just fail, buddy. You just fail. But yeah, it is kind of
But
a
yeah.
ghoulish song, but I like where it leads into a song like A Warm Place afterwards.
I
Such a
was
funny kind of contrast when you're listening to this
yeah.
album and you're getting through that song, and then like it cuts out and a one place starts. You're just sort of like, whoa, what? What is
Yeah,
happening here? A legitimately beautiful piece of music, like a really gorgeous piece of ambient music.
so pretty.
I love the sound. Like you can tell it's guitars, right? You can tell that it's like it's the guitars that are being sort of like I think strummed really really
Hmm.
fast, or I don't know the specific technique, but they're also like leathered in effects as well.
Very
And
My Bloody Valentine.
you can sort of hear like the movement along the frets. I think I don't know. It's just a really cool sound. I really love it.
That's a track that really you sort of mentioned like everyone mentions Hurt, but like this one is kind of I almost describe it as like the more understated Hurt in a certain
No,
way.
I completely agree with you. It's just it's something that like post the explosion has always just been like something that makes you look inward a little bit, or just sort of like you're forced to interrogate yourself while this is happening. And it's such a strange place, just because this final leg of the album really in its totality is so like structurally and sonically esoteric, and how just it doesn't feel like these songs that are coming, just they don't obey rules like the previous songs do. They just kind of happen.
Yeah, I can definitely
It
get
goes
that.
beautifully into Eraser, which starts with what I would give the gold medal to the most unsettling sound on the whole album.
Yeah.
Uh, it sounds like it sounds like a printer, but also it sounds like someone breathing really strangely into like a processed microphone. I don't actually know
Or
how to describe it.
like a plastic, like it sounds like someone is blowing into like plastic straws, just like
Yeah, yeah,
and you're like,
yeah.
please get that away from my ear. I just stop it. Like as a sensory thing, it's just kind of like, no, stop it. I don't like it. I don't like it. It's weird.
This is like one of the most simplistic and straightforward songs in terms of structure on the album, and yet this is one of the songs I've listened to the most, strangely enough. I really like enjoyed the song in particular when I was a kid. There was just something so satisfying about the way that it builds. The drums, okay, so the drums. The drums
Ah,
are cavernous on this song. They're huge. They sound like
Yeah.
they're being hit in a giant open space with this sort of like room reverberation, which probably was digitally added, but you just the way that it was recorded is just really 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 cool. And then there's just these little I don't know how to describe them. The sounds that come in that like are the melodic thrust of the song. Like it's processed guitar, right? It's sort of like you know being played. I don't know how to describe it. It's just processed guitar and it's this little melodic line. And then there's a certain point at which suddenly they just flip a switch and there's like 500 tons of reverb that's added to
uh-huh.
it. And it starts to sound like really, really huge. And it just builds and builds and builds in this like almost post-rocky way.
Yeah.
And then like completely cuts into the only lyrical section of the song, which just builds to this really, really cool explosion with this Chucky riff at the end of it that
Hmm.
I just think is so cool because it's like the only time on this whole album where Reznor's chugging.
Hmm.
Uh, it's just I don't know. I love this song. It's so fucking unique to me. Like it really stands out as a. I can understand why some people maybe like think it's maybe a lesser song because it's a little bit less. There's less lyrics. There's less sort of like musical complexity to it. It's literally just let's build up a song and then do a really explosive end. But I don't know. I really really dig this one.
Yeah, I could see how some people might think it's lesser because it could maybe sort of come across as like I don't want this, where it's kind of like a transition point maybe. But I agree with some of those sounds. Just feels like worms getting into my ears, and I love it.
Gonna say there are moments on this album where you do get a little bit of a reprieve, where it feels like a warm place, for instance, where it feels like some kind of semblance of control is coming back. And
Yeah.
I love the way that the transition between that song and this almost makes you feel like hope is slipping away. And then when those drums come in, it's like kind of being beaten out of you completely. I love
Hmm.
that. The structuring of this album, the ordering of the tracks, and the way that they all flow together. It's just this is why like albums are cool.
Yep.
That was what I was realizing at age 7 or whatever, however young I was when I
You
listened to
beat me
this.
by like 10 years, but I was still like, hey, I can tell there is a method to this madness. Even when, if the sounds are feel like they are worms crawling in your skin, Luke, the lyrics to Reptile feel like worms
Ah,
crawling into my skin because
love
this
this.
is just the nastiest song on the album to me.
Fucking love
It's a
it so
great
much.
song. Reptile is great, but it's also just like ugh.
Yeah. So the way that people talk about Closer, like and like the way it's sort of become like a weird sort of strip club sex
Sex
anthem,
Jam, yeah.
that to me is sort of like the what Reptile is.
Ah, yeah.
Even to the point where it's more
Mm.
explicitly about obviously it's sort of about having a very sort of poisonous misogynistic view of women
Hmm.
through the lens of all of the but it's not necessarily misogynistic in as much as it is like the whole album is about being misanthropic, right? Like
Yep.
like only
Yeah.
feeling hatred for everything. And this particular song like uses like centers that focus a lot more around the distance that Reznor feels from women and the way that this sex and the like the way that sex is used is another like cheap high is kind of like ultimately contributed to relationships with women being problematic or whatever. But also just the fact that this to me is like a textbook example of industrial metal. Like the
Oh,
beat is industrial. It
Yes.
sounds like a fucking forklift operating or something.
no, 100.
Yeah.
Well, honestly, it's really apt that you compare it to Closer just because, like, it literally mirrors where Closer is on the front half of the album in the second half. And I think it is like a mirror to that song because Closer is a song about how, warmth and interaction with another human being literally, gets you closer to God. And this is about seeing that as not a window to improvement or a window to something greater. It's about not being able to see it at all. It's like, they have the blood of the reptile underneath their skin. It's like you can't even see sex as something that could even theoretically be good for you anymore because it's just this toxic, poisonous thing because that's how fucked up you are at this point. Like you have just come to this point where you are irreconcilable with the world around you. You have everything around you is just completely black at this point.
Mm.
Yeah. It's like the listening to this song, the air kind of tastes like battery acid.
Yeah. There is something so again sensory about this song that is just so fucking it's so evocative and skin crawling to me. But at the same time, it does also just kind of go. And I feel like that contradiction really makes this moment feel like it's the real last I don't want to say it's like the last real like crescendo of the album, but it kind of feels like the last sort of truly exterior kind of motivating moment that like makes you want to move almost. And then the
Mm.
preceding two songs are kind of the crash that comes from this. The
Um,
title track. How we feeling about this one, my they thems?
Well, I say but like positive.
Yeah, no, I mean it's not a very not a very lyrical song. It has only like one real sort of extended passage, but this song to me is just sort of it is kind of a lead along moment, which is a weird moment for me
Mm.
because it's like it is the title track, but to me this is if I can describe it in like a really kind of stupid just visualized way, it's like Hurt to me takes place at the bottom of the lowest chasm in the world where there is no light, there is no nothing, there is just you and all of your problems, and it is swimming in your psyche, and the downward spiral is floating down to that point. It is
Well,
transitory.
so a couple of things. Like it's a depiction of suicide. Like the
Hmm.
lyrics explicitly describe someone shooting themselves in the head, and it's like one of the more challenging moments on the record. I
Hmm.
mean, it's obviously Trent is not advocating for it, but
No.
there is like the lyrics explicitly describe it as a solution, fixing a lifetime of problems in one determined flash. So it's a really like grueling moment of the album to process. I like the way that it has the melody at the end of Closer is played
Yeah.
on the acoustic guitar at the start of
all
the song,
right.
which is really cool. And then you have these like I wish I had a better vocabulary for like different guitar tones and sounds because there's like a guitar tone that comes through about halfway in the song that's the only other place you hear it on the album is in Hurt, the very next song.
Yeah.
So it is kind of like setting that up musically. It is basically just sort of a space to transition between Reptile, which is such an like animated song, and Hurt, which needs to kind of come out of a space of brooding. It wouldn't work essentially if you
Hmm.
went straight from Reptile to Hurt. And Hurt is, Hurt's what it is. Like, I mean, if Closer is the most famous Nine Inch Nails song, this is certainly the most famous song
Second.
that Trent Reznor has written. It's
Yeah.
just that his version of the song is obviously not the version that's famous. And there's a whole conversation to be had about Johnny Cash's version. Obviously, it's a great song, but
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
just to talk about this song, because there's like a number of differences between those two versions of the song. And like the thing about Johnny Cash's version that like is not talked about as much is like it's a really transformative version because
Yeah.
it gives the song a happy ending. And this song doesn't have a happy ending. This
Hmm.
song, it is like the final moment of like self-reflection where like I don't want to get too dark here, but like there's so in a lot of people who do end up like attempting suicide, whether they succeed or not, there's like a famous depiction of like the moments of clarity, like
Yeah.
when you make the decision to do it, everything like becomes almost like easier. A huge weight is lifted in that time, and that's kind of to me what the song feels like. There's a
Hmm.
lot of reflection in this that's quite emotional, that's sort of feeling like he's able to kind of connect with something like aspects of his own feelings in a way that's like been closed off to him before, and it really like feels like a final goodbye, and in a way that's like really profoundly upsetting and like emotionally moving. And Cash's version is great for what it is, but it is like it's a different kind of approach because Cash's
Yes.
version is like the sound of someone who is dying, of an illness basically, who's like losing their life to something that is outside of their control.
Yeah.
Heart's a song about, where the meta text is dying of cancer, saying goodbye in Johnny Cash's version. Whereas this is sort of like there's much more context, there's much more weight, and there's a much different path towards it because of this album. Like the album is the path towards it. And it gives the song a completely different tone, feels, and even subject matter than
Yeah.
the more famous version that would come later. And of course, the ending is different as well. Cash
Mm.
changes the song to end on like a major key moment
Yep.
where it sort of has this sort of sense of like, if not, happiness, then at least sort of clarity.
Resolution.
Uh, whereas this ends with like basically what is a simulated gunshot, like
Hmm.
an explosion and just the aftermath for like 2 long minutes. It's a beautiful song and it's also a grotesque song at the
Hmm.
same time.
I think that both versions of this song, their specific tone is so informed by their context. And the context of Johnny Cash's Hurt is the music video. The context of Trent Reznor, Nine Inch Nails' Hurt is the album The Downward Spiral. And to me, again, both are great. I do love both. But the Cash version never is going to have the same gravity that this one does to me. Like, just the simple choice that Trent sort of employs to kind of double track but slightly delay his vocals in the "you could have it all." That moment where it's like one of the versions of his voice sounds like it's distantly echoing into absolutely nothing. Oh, it's just one of those things where every choice within the production of this song has such a specific intent to make you feel this specific brand of hopeless, and it does such a phenomenal job at it. And I like too that the it kind of feeds into it from the downward spiral, which I think it's probably more Trent's delivery of the line than necessarily the line itself. But like the line on this album that gets me the most is when he's just sort of describing at the end of the downward spiral and just says that like everything is blue here. And you're like, ugh. It
Mm.
feels grotesque in a way you can't properly verbalize. And how hurt comes from that sort of sensory image. It just feels like, it's literally the moment where your life flashes before your eyes and then it ends. Like it's just such a it's the moment where like when I first listened to this, I was really glad that I had listened to the Deftones album that I listened to that night before this because I didn't want to fucking listen to anything after I first listened to the Downward Spiral. I was like, I just need to like go to the
Uh,
break room and like eat a fucking Reese's peanut butter cup and feel a little better about myself because this shit, like I have listened to this album so much. And like I can get to a point where like the vast majority of the track list does not probably affect me in the way an album like this is designed to anymore. If I listen to this the whole way through and get to Hurt, I'm at the end I'm just like ah,
yeah.
it's still painful to this day.
Yeah, I kind of come from this. I sort of wish I had the perspective that most people who listened to this album for the first time when it came out did, which is not having listened to the Johnny Cash version first,
Yep.
because I have just the preconceived notion of the Cash version, which I will get this off. I do quite like the Johnny Cash version. I think it is very good in its own right. But to me, the distinction and why I like the Nine Inch Nails version more is that the Johnny Cash version is almost like a grandpa talking to his son about his upcoming death as like a recounting of like, you know, life is worth living at the end of the day, despite the fact that I will pass kind of thing.
Hmm.
Whereas this version is like actually like subjectively experiencing death. Like there is no outsider like it is a song at the end of the day, so it's not actually that, but like the process of listening to it, it almost kind of it's like the development of like I said with like Reptile, where it's like you can almost taste battery acid in the air. It's like you can almost the gas in the room as you're listening to this a little bit, and you're just like
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a bit strong in a sense that I don't know. I find it important though, because it's not like it's one thing to just be like, I'm gonna make a fat load of hopeless music just for the sake of making hopeless music. Like this comes from something
Real.
genuine that makes me feel, I don't know. I guess it's like one of those things where it's like when you watch like a story that you get really invested into and then you come out the other side and then you sort of look around at your surroundings a bit differently. That's what Hurt kind of
Grounding.
feels like.
Yeah,
That's kind
like
of what it feels like to me.
it is legitimately a song where it's over and I feel relieved because it's like, okay, we've come out the other side of this journey and that space is over now. And it feels so intentional, especially at the end of the album. Like if you listen to it in isolation, it's robbed of a lot of its weight, I feel.
A few small details about the song I love, specifically like the guitar at the very start, the acoustic guitar. It's detuned, right? Like it's detuned,
Hmm.
like it's really detuned. And of course, this is one of the reasons why I could never get like I would never be able to rank the Cash version over this for me is because the specific sound, like the
Yeah.
detuning that they use there, is so effective and so haunting and so like
Anything.
bittersweet as well. Because I think this isn't just a bitter song; it is a bittersweet song. There's like
Hmm.
a sense of acknowledgement of a beauty and of like a purity that's gone from you now that you can't access anymore. Full of broken thoughts that I can't repair is my favorite lyric on this whole
That's
song.
a great
I
one.
love
That's a
the
great
image
one.
of that. But then you like compare it to the Cash song and like it's not detuned. The guitar it sounds great. It sounds like a tuned
Yeah.
guitar and
Yeah.
something is already lost there. I love the piano over the chorus as well. Like it's like it might be the only like musical texture on the album that I would describe as pretty. Even though the melody itself is quite sad, it just is like it's this shining light that's like both like a symbol of beauty but also like tinged with sadness. I really really love that. And I love how in like the middle of the song or like the second third of the song, it's almost like Reznor's voice gets more and more sort of hollowed out.
Yeah.
The one moment that like brings me closest to tears in the song is just the way he sings, "You're someone else, I'm
That's
still right here."
that's my
And there's like
favorite
a
lyric
little
on the album.
there's a little
Yeah.
quiver in his voice when he says
Hmm.
that "I'm still right here" part. That is just like one of the best moments of the whole album to me because it's so like you can't fake that. It feels
That's
so authentically, emotionally gut wrenching.
that's
Hmm.
where like the discography of this band, like not to imply it's a downhill thing from here, because The Fragile is my favorite Nine Inch Nails album, but like that literal moment to me is the height of just my emotional response to this band. Because it like again, that sort of perfect and the implication too of just that like you're addressing someone who not only is just like you're distanced from, but it's like who you can't access anymore. I'm still here, you're gone. It's like the sad part about the song is that whoever he wants to hear him singing this will never hear it. And that's
And
what
it's
it's
like
like, ugh,
it's the I'm still right here as well. The implication being that the other person has left.
yeah,
Not that he's left them, but that he's been sort of left alone. I'm
abandoned,
still
yeah.
right here. That little detail adds so much to it as well. Like it's not that you have made this choice to leave everything behind, but you have made a choice and it has meant that other people have had to leave you behind. And that's the bed you've made for yourself.
There was
Yeah,
also one other thing I wanted to mention in tangent to what all of y'all are saying in terms of the person leaving still staying right here and kind of the message not being able to be communicated anymore. I don't know if it's like drums or guitar, but it's like the kind of dun 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 like in the last half of it gets so
mm,
loud to a point where you can barely even hear what he's saying, and it just that's the bit that like gets me the most
Hmm.
is it's just it drowns it out so much and his voice is still so soft in that yeah,
mm.
no, I absolutely agree with
That
all being said.
that's a musical production trick that I'm like always a sucker for when someone is able to kind of muffle their own voice after like really emphasizing it in order to sort of accentuate a point or like, not finishing a like I think about something like Sing About Me, I'm Dying of Thirst by Kendrick Lamar when that one verse happens and then the gunshot and then it just lets the measure play out and it's totally blank because, the person singing the song died. And it's just like whenever you're able to kind of contextually inform the actual act of performing lyrics, like that's always something that just fucking hits me right in my core. I love that trick. It's a great way to close out an album that like it was one of those things where I was just like when I first listened to it I was like I obviously can't put all the pieces together of why or how, but like that was a journey, like that was a narrative. I experienced a story of another person and I want to listen to this more to understand that journey and understand that person. And that's why I think it's such a pivotal album for so many like music nerds and stuff, is because if this is one of the first albums you listen to when you're discovering music, it likely sounds like nothing you've ever heard before, or sounds enough like things that you already know that you're just like, oh, this is where that came from. And then goes on this very, detailed, very, very stark journey that you feel like you understand by the end of it emotionally, even if you can't, dissect every single lyric to get its exact meaning out of. You just get to the end and you're like, okay, I need a moment. Like it's
Yeah.
something that is designed with a whole lot of intent behind it. And and the music world responded to it as such. Like wasn't just financially successful, like critically speaking, it was perceived fairly rapturously. Like this was the complete opposite of the sophomore slump. And going forward, we're going to see how Trent responds to essentially what is the entire institution of the music industry, an institution that he kind of rebelled and did not work well within, responds positively to what is one of the lowest moments of your life and how
Mm.
that affects you going forward.
Fucking facts, bro. Yeah,
You were someone else. I'm still right here anyway.
yeah.
Yeah.
This was like this is one of those albums where it was made in the throes of the worst period of Trent's life, and it wasn't even like there was any benefit of hindsight either. Like
Mm-mm.
Trent was going through a really difficult period that would continue throughout the 90s and would ultimately culminate artistically in what The Fragile is. Um, but this to me is just the album I come back to the most. The first one I heard and still my favorite, fully and completely. I also want to shout out as well, just as a little aside as well, that some versions of the album, not my version sadly, but some versions of the album include the cover of Joy Division's Dead Souls that
That's
Nine Inch Nails
right.
did for The Crow, the original Crow
Hmm.
soundtrack.
Hmm.
If you haven't heard that, that is an amazing cover of an amazing and underrated Joy Division
Gonna
song.
add
I
that to
highly
my
recommend
library
it.
right now.
Highly recommend it. I mean, it's Nine Inch Nails in 1994 covering fucking Joy Division, you know.
That's the
So
gothiest shit I've ever heard in my entire life.
I actually might like it because Dead Souls is kind of a deep cut Joy Division song that never made it onto an album.
Mhm.
I actually might like the Nine Inch Nails cover a little bit more than the original. And it just, yeah, it sounds like it was recorded around this time. And also shout out to the original OST to The Crow, the original Crow. What a fucking
Yes.
iconic OST that is.
That has
True.
the Cure B-side Burn, one of my five favorite Cure songs. Do Not At Me. That shit is fucking unbelievable. Yeah, go download that soundtrack. You might have a
Oh,
better time listening to that as a whole than you might as the Downward Spiral, depending on what kind of person you are.
speaking of soundtracks, I think around the same time, this is also when Trent did the soundtrack for Natural Born Killers.
Yeah, or
Yeah,
it was I think before that was when act or no, it was after that is that he got the gig doing Lost Highway
That
because
too.
yeah.
Manson initially passed on that actually, which I did not
Oh.
remember being the case, but that was actually something that caused a little bit of friction between the two because it felt like, Manson got passed up for his mentor to do that, so that created a bit of friction between the two. So I always found
Well,
that to be very interesting. And also, what the fuck would have that sounded like?
Well, either way, it gives us actually one of the best non-album Nine Inch Nails songs, "The Perfect Drug." That song
Yeah.
rules. That
True.
song
Yeah.
fucking rules. That was
True.
another song that like my dad would play a lot as a kid. I think it was one of his favorite ones. So yeah, shout out to that.
Every time you mentioned something that your dad played for you as a child, it is just you are just unloading on us that your dad is the most unfathomably based parent that I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah,
God.
well,
Shout out to that that thing you sent into the group chat the other day of him on Instagram set to a what was it? What song was
it
it?
was a it was a
Madonna?
trap it was a trap remix of Frozen by Madonna.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's
and for
right.
for for Luke's information, since Luke won't have seen this, my dad posted a video on Instagram which is like slow motion shots of him like smashing ice uh on a mountainside, like breaking ice and watching it fall in slow motion, and setting it to a trap remix of Madonna's Frozen.
That's
Um,
sick. That's so
That
sick.
that makes
I'll
me
yeah.
that makes me think of that one fucking video of someone throwing like a cube of ice while playing Higher by Creed.
Yeah,
I
it's the
love
same
that.
fucking energy as that. It's the
Yeah.
same fucking energy as that. Absolutely,
That's
100%.
beautiful. I love that.
Well, now that
Um,
we have completely spiraled, hey, out of control here at the end,
Hey,
next time on this little show, on our retrospective, we are going to be talking about the final of the first sort of run of trilogy of Nine Inch Nails albums. We're going to be talking about The Fragile, which I'm pretty sure both Luke and I, at various points of one of these two recordings, have alluded to both being our favorite release from the band. So look forward to
I'm
that.
a fan.
Yeah, little bit, tiny bit. And
Mhm.
in the episodes ahead, also look forward to. I know we are going to be joined by Zach when we're covering With Teeth, because I know that's an album that he really rides for. So stay tuned for that stuff in the future. It will be coming at you. And until then, listen to more Nine Inch Nails, I guess. Those singles from the Tron soundtrack are still pretty good, even though I don't give a single fuck about that movie.
yeah,
But those
Watch
singles are
yeah,
good.
watch my
yeah. And
Neutron movie. Okay, Disney. Jared
it,
Leto. No Disney.
there's
Mm,
definitely a different timeline where doing a series like this would be a lot more morose. But so we should be very, very thankful that Trent was able to like kind of,
yep.
get his life together and become like the ripped,
Yeah.
fucking guy doing OSTs that he is.
We're here to have a
Um,
bad time.
We have good bad time.
Good bad time.
Uh